Hello and welcome to a special edition of Ask George as we discuss the sale of the stakes in the 800 teams. And who better to do this with than the cricketer's moral compass, George Dobell. Now, George, we asked for questions for this session, and there's no question I've had more over the last couple of months than where have you been?
Well, actually, it's vaguely relevant. I mean, I'm inclined to say it's none of your damn business, but it is vaguely relevant in that I suppose I had a very late midlife crisis, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to do it anymore, and that's relevant to the 100 because I've seen which direction the game is travelling, and many of the things that I love and value most about the game are disappearing. They are. I mean, the world changes all the time, and that's fine. But we all have a choice whether we want to be involved in those changes. And I wasn't sure that I did. So I had a couple of months out, and God bless the cricketer for letting me do that. And actually, then I needed a roof. I mean, no doubt windows and doors too, which focuses the mind terrifically. And I've come back to work in the last couple of weeks, and I've loved it. I've loved every day of it. So I feel refreshed, and the world has changed. There's no way around that. But cricket remains a great game, and I'm very lucky to make a living talking and writing about it. I'm very grateful that I was given the time off, by the way, to make that decision, because I'm very aware it's hugely self-indulgent. But at the same time, it's not so bad to really, really care about what you do, and I do. And I think we should acknowledge that the game we knew has changed massively, and it's going to continue changing in the next few years.
Well, appreciate your your candid response there. Wasn't quite expecting where that was going to go, but thank you very much for that. And it's good to have you back, and good to be able to talk about maybe not a rosy subject, but certainly an active one, and get back on the road with these videos. We missed the last couple of months. So before we start, let's just establish kind of where we're at. So last week, following a 3-round bidding process, the ECB confirmed they'd received £520 million for the sale of the stakes in the 800 teams. The plan is to plough this money into the recreational and domestic game in what the ECB say will future-proof the sport in England and Wales for at least the next generation. I'm sure we can get around to that. But this sort of it answers one question, but provokes many others, many more. Is this a sticking plaster for English cricket? Is it the antidote? What have investors really bought, and is the game more united or divided after this process? Now, we're going to attempt to try and answer some of those questions along the way, and we're going to dip into the digital mailbag to try and do that. You've been submitting your questions in all droves over the last couple of days, and while we can't get through them all, we'll certainly endeavour to cover off as many areas as we possibly can. And let's kick off with a really interesting one from Jack Rule, who proliferates these sessions, and they ask, given it's clear that the investors wanted to invest and the competition isn't going to disappear as some may like, isn't it time to stop being against it and now make sure that it works for everyone's interests?
I think that's a really well put question, and I think Jack has a point. It is absolutely true that the die is cast, and there is no going back from this. It doesn't matter to some stage what's gone on in the past. It's about the future, and this is a fact of life. Many of us will think it's a mistake. Many of us will regret it, but it is a fact. I think Jack's question is sensitively phrased in that it isn't triumphalist. I think that would be a mistake, and I think that it's not disrespectful of the people who actually feel that they've lost something. So I do think, maybe this is an over the top word, that you've got to allow people to grieve. Is that over the top? For the world that has gone and is going, and the rhythms and cycles of the season that are either gone or going. These county teams, they mean a lot to people. And they've changed, at least changed, in a very profound way. So allow people to come to terms with that at their own speed. Understand there's going to be resentment, but Jack makes a point, and without, you could write a dissertation for an answer, but he makes a point. And one of the key things about this is that I don't doubt that new people have been brought to the game by the 100. Some have. They've lost some too. It's something that's not talked about as much, but I do think that some people will stop going to the games and fall out of love with the game. And don't take that. That's not a small thing. That's a massive error for the game to have lost some of its most loyal supporters. All I would say that the spark of positivity I have here is that whether it's played over 100 balls, 100 overs, 4 or 5 days, it's still a great sport. And that's a huge asset of cricket, almost unique, I think, that it's really, really good and absorbing over lots of different formats. So there's always room for positivity, I think. And the fact is that I don't think it's that constructive to be bogged down by what's gone in the past.
Stephen Hollins moves us on a little bit and asks, is international cricket in August in England now completely gone for the foreseeable?
It was not completely, but yes. I mean,
it's going to happen this year.
Well, it might. I think it only happens this year if the game goes into a 4th day or 3rd day, possibly. So, but yes, if we're going to talk factually, there's a bit of international cricket in August, and there will be a little bit in future years like that. But the general thrust of his question, it's still right while being factually wrong. Does that make sense?
Mm. I mean, England women certainly are never going to play in August for a very long time, while the 100 dominates that particular window for sure, or the back end. It's going to certainly move around from that perspective. Really interesting question from Swapnil, which kind of moves on a little bit from the 100, but it's still incredibly related. Is how much is Mohammed Abbas moving out of Hampshire related to the GMR takeover of obviously Hampshire, and obviously now they've taken the remaining stake of Southern Brave as well?
I don't think it is related. I'm really glad that someone's asked the question. I'm very happy to. I can find no evidence of that being the case. Hand on my heart, if I found evidence of it, I think we would come in very hard. Yeah. So just to give some clarity to that, Hampshire also lost James Vince. And James Vince obviously a very, very fine batter, and they felt the need to replace perhaps in the overseas market. That left them with a choice of 2 overseas seamers, Abbott and Abbas. And I think Mohammed Abbas didn't take a fifer for Hampshire last season. I think Abbott took 5. I think Abbas's availability is somewhat questionable this season. I mean, I know he's available for the first 7 games he's going to be playing, but not. And he's obviously a fine cricketer and a super signing, you would think. But you can see how it happened. I think we've got to be aware of issues around the subject that has been raised here. That specifically on that question, I see no evidence of that being the truth at the moment. But if anyone has any that they want to share, I'm all ears. But I think it makes sense from a purely cricketing perspective.
Yeah, the phraseology I think they used was restructuring their squad or reshaping their squad, which I guess can be taken both ways. It can either be taken as one of those lines that you see in a press release that you ignore, or it's the truth. And I think both is probably certainly the latter, as you referenced with James Vince and
they also have this group of young bowlers coming through. John Turner, perhaps most notable. For whom they have to give opportunities at some stage. So I take the point of not dismissing it out of hand. We have, as a team, looked into this. Haven't found anything, and I wouldn't want to. Yeah, I haven't found anything, and it does make some cricketing sense.
Let's move on to sort of back to the 100 a little bit here with a question from Danny. Given the 3 of the teams are majority owned by Indian companies, will those teams be persuaded by the ECB to have their men's home matches earlier in the afternoon slot on Indian television? Presumably he's referencing the men's matches there. This was put to the ECB last week at the session you were at Lord's,
By me, I
What
think.
was the answer that you got, and what was the vibe you got?
A very strong answer from Richard Gould, saying no, saying specifically, actually, we're going to prioritise 100% attendance, which does make sense. So they're going to prioritise the attendance and sort of let the other stuff take care of itself. At the same time, if you change the times and went earlier, you're potentially losing the market in America, which when I was at ESPN Crick Info, America was very often the third biggest market, the third biggest audience. There's a lot of expat people from both Asia and actually the Caribbean in America. And actually, you potentially lose that audience if you bring the game times in England forward. So that was the answer. I have no reason to think that they were lying. Richard Gould is very frank and open, I find. I thought it was a very good press conference, actually, very useful. And the same thing the next day or the day after or something, I went to Old Trafford and had that conversation with Lancashire as well, and they said pretty much the same thing. So it doesn't feel that there's a huge amount of pressure to do that right now. And bear in mind, some of the team owners also have ownership of those American sides, so they are looking at those audiences. Whether there would be a possibility of swapping the double headers, so the men's games were first, followed by the women's games, maybe. I mean, that would seem to be something that might be worth experiments at some time anyway. But it didn't seem to be something that was a massive priority from anybody. One to keep our eye on, though, yeah?
Absolutely, I think. And also, there were a couple of questions coming up about sort of, what does success and return on investment look like and stuff. And surely if you don't see an immediate improvement in that area, that might be a measure, quite an easy measure, quite an easy lever to pull, even if it does mean, as you say, flipping the matches, which, to be honest, we should have seen a lot more of anyway. But even if it means just flipping matches, that's quite an easy alteration to make, even if you're only doing it for, say, half of your games, only 4 of them in the end.
I think you make a really good point. I think that it would be foolish for me to sit here and say it's not going to happen. But I honestly don't think it's something it's about to happen. All sorts of things might happen over the next 10 years. And when people talk about future-proofing the game, how long do you mean? How long's a generation? All these questions. You could argue about the definition of everything before answering any question. But I honestly don't think that there are necessarily things to worry about in every shadow here. I think that this version of the ECB is quite straight.
WG Rumble Pants asks, if 100 viewing attendance figures fall drastically or dramatically in the next few years, and no new TV deal for the competition materialises in 2028 for 29, would the investors who are buying the teams disappear? And are they taking that investment risk?
Well, sure, they're taking that risk. Of course they are. I mean, I think the broadcast audiences fell for the last 2 years, didn't they?
Yeah.
So, which is why it's so remarkable that they've realised these prices. Of course, they're taking a risk. Of course, there's a risk here. I think there's quite a lot of scope for growth, though. I think the overseas element of the broadcast deal is only worth £2 million a year. I mean, it really hasn't sold. So, yes, they're taking a risk, and yes, they could walk away, could not for 5 years. I think we've other questions about this, but there's a lock-in. So, yeah, they'll be putting lots into it. Look, remember who some of these people are who have invested. You've got the Ambanis, who own Reliance Industries, who are basically the biggest cricket broadcast rights owner in the world. You've got people involved in Google and Microsoft. There's a lot of levers, to use your expression, that can be pulled here to allow the game to grow all sorts of ways, to have lots of publicity. And I'm sure that will happen. Who could say whether the people will get their money back? It looks like some of their sums are absolutely astronomical, but I think that I'd be amazed if the figures went down. I actually think they're starting from a pretty low base.
Indoor Kite Society asks, while the money to the counties and recreational game is welcome, is it really going to solve the many structural barriers to young people entering the game? I think the first thing to say on this is that it is a good question. First thing to say on the premise of this question is that I don't recall that being one of the promises. Doesn't mean we can't. Doesn't mean we can't hold the game to account. However, given it's now awash with a bit more money, so ultimately, I think we know the answer to this. Are these barriers going to be compromised in any way by this fresh money available?
Yeah, it's a massive help, a very big tick in the positive box. Absolutely, it is. In that, the counties cannot say, and they're not going to be able to say, and the ECB made this again clear the other day, they are not going to be able to charge for kit and coaching for kids on the pathway. It's a very obvious barrier to entry. Just to reiterate, just for people who aren't aware what I'm talking about here, if you're a talented child and you're spotted, and you get invited into the county system, you will, in most cases, be then asked to pay for your kit and coaching, which might be anything from £400 a winter or whatever. So to some people, that's fine, and to some people, that's a prohibitive amount of money. That barrier, it should have been taken out of the game years ago, but it's going to go. It categorically will go. It's still an expensive game. What's a bat? 300 quid? There's a lot of things. And the fact is that most cricket is played behind a paywall. Tickets are quite expensive. We're all aware of the issues. Of course we are. But this will help, yes. And of course, then there's the whole state school thing. And they haven't defined yet what they mean by grassroots or recreational. But it basically means anything that's not professional. And so I think quite a lot of this money will go into the State School Initiative. Now, £50 million into the State School Initiative, actually still a bit of a drop in the ocean, isn't it? It shows you how big the problem is. It's definitely going to help. As someone who has all sorts of reservations about the 100, all sorts of reservations about everything that's happened, come on, let's be honest, this is a big, big positive.
And I think that's why in the conversations we've had, certainly off air, that I think there is a lot of, not concern, but scrutiny required, I think, over how that money is actually spent, because of how important it can be and sort of changing it can be, that it goes to the right places, where it goes at all, I think needs clarifying. It's pretty, when it comes to the 18 counties and the MCC, that's kind of, we know the answers there. With the recreational game, we don't necessarily know the answers yet, and what that looks like in terms of that investment package. And I think it's really important that we continue to hold that element of it to account, because it is, albeit the smallest portion, maybe certainly one of the most important bits.
And we've had very passionate messages, letters from people in recent times, firstly about university cricket and the cuts to that, which personally I think is a very poor decision, and actually also the over 50s cricket. Now, I know that probably seems like a detail to many people, but honestly, people care. I mean, we work for a cricket publication and a cricket magazine, and that audience has been really quite exercised by that issue. As we've heard a lot about it, maybe there'll be scope for looking at those sorts of things as well. I don't think they will relook at those, by the way, but it shows that the huge need there is out there for investment in everything that's not the professional game.
Nick asks, not myself, do you think the investors will want the 100 to move to a 120 ball format, or just see it as a slight rule variation like impact subs in the IPL? In terms of the format, again, that was another question put to Richard Gould and co on Thursday. What was the response, and I guess also what was your sense of what their answer meant?
So had you asked me that question a week ago, I'd have said categorically yes. And now I'm going to say, do you know what? It doesn't seem to be as much priority as I thought. So the answer was, it's not something that we're particularly talking about. Everyone said that. Do I still think it'll happen? Probably. But the firm yes I'd have given you a week ago is probably at this stage. So everyone said that it's not such an issue. And I never thought it was the key issue, personally. I mean, I'm old enough to remember 8 ball overs. You can live with 5 and 6. I think we've had 4 in the past as well. That sort of thing doesn't really bother me. And of course, there is a benefit for the broadcasters, and that matters. So there will be a conversation, no doubt, In terms of attention to detail and it being, if England continue to lose and they're actually on the quiet going through a bit of a horror run, um, then I think it's something that will be looked at because you're not really preparing people, I don't think, for the international format if they're not playing at domestic level. And we talk about attention to detail. Well, play the slightly different format of the game. That's an attention to detail thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and in an era where players are going to be contracted players are going to be restricted in terms of the amount of other T20 cricket they're allowed to play, to then go, but you do have to play in this competition that isn't a T20, that we don't play at international level as well, perhaps seems a little bit counterproductive. I think ultimately the issue here is not so much whether matches are played at 2 p.m. or whether the games are 120 balls or it's 100 or whatever, is that do the ECB have control over these decisions anymore?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. They've retained control of the competition. They really have. But obviously, if all the investors and team owners come to them and say we want to do something differently, then they'll still listen. There's going to be a committee of owners. I'm not sure what it's called, an investors committee or something. But with a lot of these things, just because it's like members committees at counties these days. I mean, how much power do they have? To be honest, I might say the same thing about the PCA. Do you remember at school they used to, you might have a student council and they'd debate all sorts of things and say, do you know what we think should get rid of the headline? Yeah, whatever. No one, just because you allow people to think they're impacting decisions doesn't mean they actually are. Factually, the ECB retain control.
Yes, cricket is full of panels and boards and groups who comment on cricket, don't necessarily do a great deal else.
No, well, I mean, it's only a few weeks ago the PCA was saying they were going to, take legal action, or considering legal action, I should say, about no objection certificates. And actually, the no objection certificates has worked exactly as the ECB said it would.
The Lancashire County Cricket Members Group, the non-host counties have asked, have the non-host counties reported to be getting 27 million each from the sale?
Less, I think. 23.5.
Has anyone from the host counties thanked the non-hosts for the 210 million that's been reallocated?
Well, I think you'd have to remember it's a symbiotic relationship. So none of the teams are getting anything without all of the teams getting something.
Yeah.
This is the sort of triumphalist tone I think is very unhelpful. I don't think it would be sensible to try and divide and rule, to try and lord it over the... and also, you kind of understand that quite a lot's been given up here. Quite a lot has been sacrificed. On the quiet, the England teams, again, as I'll say, are not having a very good run of things. I mean, they've had 2 World Cups in each format. The men's team, where they stunk the place out. The women's team have just had a hell of a time of things in Australia. And actually had a pretty horrendous T20 World Cup exit as well. A lot has been squeezed to enable this sale to go ahead. So there are positives. They've realised a lot of money, and that money will do a lot of good. No doubt about it at all. But there are costs as well, and the costs are very, very significant. And for those of us who those counties, they mean a lot to us in lots of ways. People may have been brought up around their county team. It may have been where their parents and their grandparents went. These things matter to people. They're part of the community. And it's changed and it's diminished and its future is uncertain. Sure, they've got some money to get it through for a few years. So I think it would be unhelpful to talk in that way. I don't think it's accurate, and I don't think it's helpful.
And from a similar, from the opposite end of the spectrum, from Manchester OGs, would existing supporters of the game be better served by being critical friends rather than sworn enemies? We could maybe extrapolate that for maybe, I don't know, the whole world.
I mean, again, probably. I think that's a better toned question, if it's fair for me to say. understand that people are grieving. Okay, I'm going to use the same word because I think it's the right word. And people will take different times, and you will have lost some long-term, very good, loyal supporters. See, not everything gets sold. Not everything can be, and it's absolutely fine. We are where we are, but you can't sell, you can't buy loyalty and love. And so the people who grew up watching Somerset or whatever, they feel that what they love and value has been given up, and they're largely right. Their future, their long-term future, is uncertain. So just tread a little bit easy when you're making these grand pronouncements and being triumphalist, because, as I say, it's not a win-win.
And let's face it, many of the counties, I mean, as far as I'm aware, many of the counties are looking for outside investment. This is not just a 100 thing. This is a county cricket problem. We've already seen one county sold. There'll be investment into at least a couple of others. This is something that we've crossed the Rubicon. This is very much something we're going to have to get used to. Everyone's going to have to get used to.
Yeah, I mean, on a day-to-day basis, how much do people care whether something's sold? I don't know. I don't know how much difference it makes who owns it. I mean, that's not to say it doesn't. It's just I don't know. But the idea that the Gillette Cup, the NatWest, was the pinnacle event in the domestic season, well, that's gone. The idea that the Championship had some structure and was designed to prepare people in the best way possible for Test cricket, that's gone. The 50-over cricket, well, you've seen, you were watching in real time the dangers that people were warned of 10 years ago when this was first talked about. There are downsides to this sale. There are absolutely upsides. I'm trying to be balanced about it, but let's not ignore the downsides. They're absolutely there. Now, maybe it was inevitable. Maybe this had to happen. I don't think so, but maybe it did, and they certainly deserve praise for raising the ECB. That is, for raising the amount of money. If you're going to do this, you are going to sell your soul, at least get a good price for it. And obviously saying they sold their soul is a motive. Yeah, but I'm not sure. There are huge downsides.
Let's sign off with one from JJ Hassan. Would you say now that the 100 has been a resounding success without even making a profit?
No, I think it's been a partial success. In that this money will do some good stuff. It will, what's the expression? Safeguard the future of the counties. Future-proof. Well, how long's the future? I mean, they would be going some to screw it up within 5 years, but they do have to reimagine themselves, and it's quite hard to see. They don't get to play T20 when they want to play it. They're not going to get the same bilateral payments. I suspect membership numbers will decrease as the number of championship games decrease. That's our next argument to have in the coming 6 to 9 months, I'm sure. So there are lots of things they're going to have to do. They're going to have to be smart with the way they spend this money. Let's remember that the number one thing, we've phoned around all the counties in the last few days. What's the number one thing they say? Debt. That's what they're paying off. They're paying off debt. And in some cases, this isn't even earning enough to pay it all off. So look, the future for the host counties looks pretty good. Those who aren't hosting, going to be really difficult to still be relevant in 20 years. Maybe that's too far away to look at. I don't know. But, I think the job is to look into the future. And I think it's a very, very uncertain future for lots of them. And they're talking about diversifying and stuff. I don't know, that's sensible and stuff, but I want my cricket club to play cricket. And we have sold August. And it does mean that the whole, the preparation of the England team is compromised a little bit. And actually, for all we are told about the explosion of interest in the women's team, which is partially correct, it's not really manifesting itself in results in young players coming through, is it? Early days. It's fine, early days. But just for all the hype we hear about it, let's just have a wee bit of reality as well. Keep hearing how brilliant it's been for women's cricket. Well, it didn't look that brilliant in the last 6 months. I think that there were some other practical questions. Maybe we didn't get a chance to do them. Are we going to see Indian players playing? We'll see female Indian players playing as we have before. No sign at all. We're going to see male Indian players in the 100. There were other questions about will the competition expand? Not massive amount of pressure on that to happen. Bear in mind that there's a lot of other competitions. Some of these team owners own teams in other competitions. They're not going to want to clash. So the fact that it's a short, 28 days, I think it is, competition is a positive. I don't see that they want to make it 6 weeks or so. I'm not hearing pressure for that. If there were to be, it might be at the front end. It's the CPL which looks more vulnerable than Major League, I think. So the Caribbean looks more vulnerable than America to any expansion. But there isn't a huge amount of pressure for expansion. And there isn't any likelihood of India's male players suddenly getting the opportunity to play. Just because the team owners might be Indian, they're not the BCCI, it's a different thing. But maybe, that will change down the line, but I don't see why it would at the moment.
And also, just another sort of question along those kind of lines as well is: do you want to clear up what's happening with the 1.3 million pounds that the ECB committed to each of the counties for essentially voting through the 100, and what its future looks like beyond the end of the current TV deal?
No, because I don't know. If I'm honest, and also we don't know what the next TV deal is going to look like. But what we do know is there were lots of questions about what are the benefits for the new investors. They will get 80% of the next specific 100 broadcast deals. That's a huge change. So there will be a distinct deal for the 100, and these entities will split it, 80% of it. So that's a big deal. That's a major change. They will also get the ticket income, sponsorship. So in Yorkshire's case, we've sold 100% for a terrific price, I think. They won't get any benefits at all, Yorkshire, through that period, as I understand it. And that's probably okay for Yorkshire because they can go and play at Scarborough or so much, which is already very popular. So they're in a slightly different position. But will there? I don't see that there are ongoing benefits though. Other clubs, obviously, they'll be sharing it. It's a big change. I can't remember the exact question you asked about the 1.3 million. So in the longer term, I think we expect, but we're not sure, that the market for bilateral cricket will probably shrink. I mean, it's already frozen the last deal. Effectively, it shrunk because of inflation. So that is a concern, that the actual distribution from central ECB is likely to diminish, which is why the money that's just come in, they've got to be really, really careful with and smart about how they spend it. And just on that, there are all sorts of ring fences. They're only allowed to spend it on 3 different things. They can spend it on paid off debt, very sensible. Money making, I don't know how you commercial developments. So you can't just build; it's got to build something that's going to make money. So I don't know, and reserves, which is ironic because before talk of the 100 started, the ECB had reserves of something like 100 million. I mean, this is one of the ironies. People talk about how cash-strapped counties are, but they needn't have been. There's 100 million in the bank, and they spent absolutely millions making this happen. It's fine. It's that's the past. But when somebody writes a book about it, they may conclude that the counties were bribed with their own money. They were kept weak so that they were malleable. Anyway, we are where we are. And go back to the tone of some of those questions. I think this could be a uniting moment. In that, we all know that what the past, what's happened, and it's gone, and now we know what's in front of us. There'll be arguments over the rest of this summer about the domestic shape going into 2026, and there'll be a new domestic shape in 26. We could argue about that legitimately, but there probably is time now to take a breath and get the hell on with it. And I say that respectfully as someone who has a huge amount of sympathy for those county cricket lovers who are mourning the lost world, but it is lost.
Well, on that cheery note, shall we?
Well, it's
shall
not
we call it?
entirely. It's not entirely uncheering. I hope it isn't. It's just trying to be realistic. The game has always changed. You know, there were people in 1963 saying, you know, what's this nonsense? You know, but those early competitions, there were 65 overs a side, 130 overs in the day. They called it limited overs cricket. Well, 69, I think it was the introduction of the Sunday League, and played on Sundays. People were horrified. And then 2003, the start of T20. And you and I still get messages from people saying all this pyjama cricket's nonsense. The world has always changed, and we might not like every change, but the game is still really bloody good. And we might not care about the 100. Personally, why the hell would I care? You know, which team won? None of them are geographically anything to do with me, really. And none of the players will have any great loyalty. But I may be proved wrong in time, but there's still a lot of other cricket out there, and it's still a great sport. So, you know, we are where we are, and I'm just trying to be realistic. And there's lots of good from this, but the reason they spent a lot of money is because English cricket's actually given up a lot.